So our speaker today, her name is Leslie Engle Young, and I've actually known her since, I don't know, probably before first grade, as her dad was my first grade teacher, and her dad and my dad are best friends to this day, and they get together every single week to have a Coke together in a garage. So Leslie and I have grown up together, but I know that she works for Pencils of Promise, but I don't know much about it, so I'm excited to hear more. And her bio is this. Leslie Engle Young has spent her career in education, both domestic and international. An expert in early childhood education, she began her career as a preschool teacher and evolved into a leader in global education programming. In 2009, Leslie moved to Laos to support the founding of Pencils of Promise. Alongside her Lao colleagues, she was responsible for establishing all pragmatic and operational systems in Laos that served as the foundation for expansion into Guatemala and Ghana. Since then, Leslie has served in numerous capacities at the organization and is currently the Chief Operating Officer, a role that allows her to lead the strategic direction of program services and innovation in collaboration with 100 more global education advocates who work with Pencils of Promise through Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos. Leslie has served as an education advisor to groups across the globe. She has participated in ILA's Leaders for Literacy Day, roundtable talks with the Independent Evolution Group and the World Bank, or at the World Bank, and advised multiple nonprofit leaders in developing original social impact concepts. So we welcome Leslie Engle Young.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. It is so, can y'all hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. It's so nice to be here. I feel very welcome and very excited, although I do definitely take offense to the fact that maybe you are all experiencing warm spring-like weather, which is not what I have here in New York. It is still freezing. There's snow on the ground, and I am very much over it. So I'm happy for you all, but a little bit jealous, I must say. I think that some of you, I can even like see sunshine out your windows, which is, not what we have here. But again, super happy to be here and excited to share a little bit about my work and about the organization that I work for called Pencils of Promise. So I know you all are on mute for the recording's sake, but please at any time, if you, I don't know how you guys prefer to do this, but raise your little hand emoji or jump in. I would love, if there's questions at any point in time and you want to ask them, please don't hesitate to do so. More than happy to answer them as we go along, as well as anything that comes up for anyone at the end of this. So before I share a few slides, I'll just tell a little bit about kind of the history of the organization that I work at and sort of set the context for what we're talking about when we are emphasizing global education, kind of what the problem is, what we're answering for. So I've been with this organization since 2009, where I've been working in global education development. So for us, that looks like primarily working in rural areas in Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos. So to kind of, again, set the context, I think it's helpful to think about when I say like a school in Ghana, sort of what I am talking about. So all of you here have likely gone to or have had family that's gone to schooling in the US. And when you picture that school, it likely has walls, it likely has a roof, it likely has books and a trained teacher and a bathroom and running water, all the things that you probably, if I were to guess, you probably wouldn't even think to list if you were to describe your school. They would probably just be the basics. And that's sort of the gap that we're talking about solving when we're talking about under-resourced and historically marginalized places across the globe. So for example, when I mention, a place that needs a school in Ghana, what would currently be there would be a space below a mango tree with maybe some stools and some dirt for the kids to sit on. And so, well, it's very picturesque, and you can imagine it's, there's a lot of beautiful nature surrounding this. That means that there are all of these external forces that can stop you from going to school. So beyond just those internal forces of I'm tired or I don't want to go today, there is also it's raining or it's cold or it's windy or my teacher isn't there and there's no substitute policy, all of these sorts of things that are going to prevent you from having the ability to regularly go to school. So that's really the business that Pencils of Promise is in, as well as sort of answering that question of, now that you have this school, let's say we build you a physical structure, or with you, we build a physical structure. What's actually happening in that school? So as Melissa was saying, I started as an educator and I have family that all is teachers. And so it's always been what I personally bring to this organization is the deep belief that if we are going to support teachers, we should only ever be making their jobs easier, because you have one of the hardest jobs in the world. And you have one of the hardest jobs in the world in a place that is particularly under-resourced, where you don't have the training, you don't have the books, you don't have the materials. So I, or my colleagues, have no business going in and saying, try this new cool technology or this curriculum on top of everything else you do. So everything that we do at Pencils of Promise as an intervention is meant to make the teacher's life easier to increase the student outcomes. So how can we make it easier for you to get better outcomes for your students? Not more complicated, not more, newfangled tech and all these types of things. Just how can we make it easier for you to get better outcomes for your students? So and that was really how the frame of reference that I brought to the organization in the very beginning. And then through the course of time at the organization, I've, in my personal life, I've become a parent. So I also think about it now in terms of, if I want to be able to look at a parent in Ghana, Guatemala, Laos, anywhere in the world, and I want to be able to say, I really believe you should send your kid to school. And I want to be able to mean that. I want to mean that I would send my kid to that school. So I want to be able to say that school is safe. I promise your kid will feel safe there. Physically, emotionally, and psychologically, they will be safe. I want to be able to tell you they'll be learning there. It's not a waste of your time and your resources when you're in a world of competing resources, where maybe your child could be caring for other children or supporting income for your family. I want to be able to tell you, I promise this is worth it. Because we're talking about external forces, there are, again, a lot of external reasons why you wouldn't send your kid to school that have nothing to do about you not caring about your kid, but they have everything to do about practicality, wanting your kid to be safe or wanting your kid to be with family. So that's something that we take very seriously, is, building this safe structure and then what happens within this structure. So that's sort of the context of where we're starting with. So now I'll kind of walk through a little bit more details of what the organization does. Do I have the ability to screen share? Let's see. I do. Okay. You all see a picture of an adorable small child with a hat? Great. Okay, so this is Pencils of Promise. This is sort of what we look like and how we operate. We like to think that this is more than really an opportunity. We believe that this work is a calling. We believe that a pathway to really achieving your dreams is through education. And we believe that education is equity work. We believe that this is work in justice and in equity, and saying to every single child, no matter where you are born, what circumstances you're born into, what resources you have, you deserve the right for choice. You deserve the right for an education, so you can be your own determining factor of what happens in your life. You can make these sorts of decisions. So we're always looking for people to join us in any way, shape, or form, by being advocates of global education, by being advocates of education in your community, and helping schools and students in your community be connected as global citizens to the world, things that we think are incredibly important just as we're looking at the continued development. Our CEO likes to talk about, our CEO is Kylie Scales. She likes to talk about how we are starting with a child and looking towards the world, right? But we are always keeping in mind the child first, that we're able to transform a child that has an incredibly huge ripple effect. I mean, we don't need to go into that. We all know that you invest in kids, you invest in girls and women, you see the return on investment a millionfold over time, right? So that's what we're talking about, is just seeing this grow and grow and grow over time in all sorts of different measurable ways, as well as just anecdotal ways that you can see what happens when you're really caring for and investing in children. So I'll go through a little bit of like what this actually looks like. And I think I talked about this at a very high level, but this is kind of our well, I guess we're calling it a pathway, but like our charts to sort of how we are achieving a lot of this. So we often start with building a structure. So again, you're picturing that school that you had, or your child or niece or nephew or grandkid had, and it looks very different than what we're talking about here, what we're replacing here. So we're starting with just physically, do you have a safe and sound structure? We're making sure that within that classroom, students are nurtured and cared for, that they're cared for beyond simply tracking their outcomes and their literacy outcomes, but that they're cared for in deep and meaningful ways, that school becomes a place where you feel welcome and loved and supported and safe. We're making sure that teachers have that too. And I kind of said this at the beginning, but it's incredibly important to me that we, and I wish that everywhere in the world would do this, that truly focuses that teachers are humans. Teachers are real people that are trying really, really hard to do incredibly difficult work. So making sure that teachers have the support, have the network, the camaraderie, the peers, all of these types of things kind of do the work, because it's very different than where there's no teacher in-service days, there's no professional development, all that kind of stuff that you would assume. I guess, to tell a quick story, when I was living in Laos, which I lived in for 4 years, I was once on a small boat with a couple of people, and we were going out to visit a community that was only accessible by boat. And there was a young woman who, I don't know her exact age, probably looked like 18, 19. And I could speak a little bit of Lao at this point. So I was having a small conversation with her. And I came to find out that she was on her way to a new 5-year posting where she was going to be a teacher in a community that she had never been to, that speaks a language that she doesn't speak, and leaving her family for the first time ever. So she was going to have to get off this boat, hike up this mountain, and arrive somewhere and inherit this school and suddenly be supposed to do it without anything there, without any of these resources. So that's what we're talking about, just how can we be that continued development and support? And that's what so many teachers around the globe are facing. And we know that teachers here at home are also just facing tremendous challenges, especially now. So how are we really investing in that? And then another key component of our work is making sure that, again, a school is all those things that we expect for ourselves, our children, and our family, that a school is also a place where you can drink clean water, where you can wash your hands on a regular basis, the types of things that we so deeply take for granted, but that keep children out of school. Children all over the world lose school days every year from preventable illness, from not washing their hands, or from drinking unfiltered water. Or young girls are missing 1 week of school every single month because of menstruation and falling deeply behind their peers. So these types of things that we're just making sure that you have the resources and the ability to have, and the dignity, you should be allowed these types of things. It shouldn't be stopping you from going to school because you need to use the bathroom in privacy. So these types of things that, again, we all sort of take for granted, wanting to make sure that students really have. There's a few things that are incredibly important to us as an organization that I think, I mean, I'm certainly biased, but from knowing other organizations, that really does set us apart. So one of these main ones on this picture on the left, you see our country directors in Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos. Something that I think folks often picture when you picture international development is people that look like me and have my training living in other places. And that is not our model. So while I did do that for a short period of time, our actual goal is that everything is run, led, developed by nationals of the countries that they operate in. So we have 100% local staff in Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos, which I always felt was a huge differentiator and incredibly important in our work, and then never more important until COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, organizations across the globe had to, for safety, send their staff home and send their staff packing. So you had people from the UK, the US, Australia, were all sent home, and these communities that they supported were left behind. And that was like what really solidified it for us as an organization, the deep, deep, deep importance of local presence, because our staff was there. They were part of these communities. They were able to find ways to pivot and support immediately and make sure that immediately they were still available and still there. So that's pretty different for us. We're also, where we work, we are very careful about where we operate. So people often ask the question, why Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos? They're very spread out in different types of places. And we're very open to continuing to grow, but we look really, we deeply vet the places that we work, wanting to make sure that we are operating in places that want us, that want our partnership, that want to do this work together, have some stability within government. So we're looking for some stability in terms of investment that we can be making, and really just has an education sector that wants to see this, that is looking to progress this, that is looking to move this work forward. So that's really how we kind of vet where we're operating, and that just there's deep need, so that we're not one of 100 organizations when you walk down the street, that we're one of a handful that's really helping to meet a need. And then another thing that is quite different about us, that a lot of organizations are increasingly doing, is ensuring that we have a really strong community investment. One of our kind of our founding principles was that we don't do handouts and we don't do gifts, that we do partnerships and we build things together for sustainability, because we want to make sure that we're doing something that lasts, that we're doing something that you want. So I think if you so many things are easy to start to picture when you think about them in your own community, like the communities that about, public schools. And if someone from another country were to walk into that community and that school and say, here's the 5 things you need, you'd be like, how do you know? What are you talking about? How do you know I need that? You don't know anything about this, right? So we're looking to ask communities first, what do you want? What do you need? How would you like to build this together? And how would you like to move this forward together, so that it is truly a partnership and it's something that you own? And we see that in quantifiable ways. We see that's what works, because there's a deep level of pride and ownership. When someone, in the last decade, in traveling lots of places other than Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos for work, I've seen countless schools that are completely empty or closed, donation drops that weren't used because they weren't in the right language, or they weren't, all these types of things, because they're led by really great intentions. But if you don't have the community buy-in of, we need this, and we know how to renew this, because then it's also just a one-time thing. If you drop off something that is not replaceable in any way, it really doesn't have that continued investment ability. So that's what we're saying when we talk about community investment. And the next thing is that we really are looking to just look at our results to drive our progress. So our just kind of output results are large for the time that we've been in operation. We now have, even this is a little outdated, we probably have like 560 schools that are operating in Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos. And this, under sustainability, I was just kind of talking about this fact, it kind of sounds like low-hanging fruit in terms of a stat, but that 100% of our schools remain open and operational is, again, actually quite a differentiator, because you'll see a lot of places in these parts of the world that were opened up without any thought to how you would provide ongoing support. And so, they just were one and done, kind of this beautiful building that was left. So we're really making sure that we're seeing that each and every day. And then we're making sure that what's happening in the classroom is working, right? That we're measuring the actual tangible skills that students are gaining, and that we can, kind of going back to being that parent, that I can say, I want to send my child to this school. I know that at this school, even their outcomes will be better. Their learning outcomes will be stronger, all those types of things that we want to make sure that we're measuring and looking at. So we're always looking at our numbers. And something that's unique about us in the space of international development is that our funding is largely private, and or largely with institutions that are really willing to look at results and iterate and make changes. So we're not one of those groups that is stuck saying, oh, we have a 5-year grant, so we just have to do this thing, even though we all kind of know it's not working super well. We're able to say, several months in, we're able to look at it and listen to teachers and listen to students and say, okay, we need to tweak this. This needs a change in this way or this way to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And then really, this last photo, you can see the big called out boxes are my colleagues, Lenoy, Freeman, Ya, and Jorge, who are the country leaders. And this is just kind of draws attention to me of this is the work. I think of my job, I think of anyone else that sits in the New York or US offices to be support staff, that our headquarters are actually in Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos, and the US is a support team. Think of my job as a job to like clear the pathway. Like, here, what do you want to do? Let me make sure and see how many obstacles I can get out of the way for you so that you can accomplish these goals, because these are your goals, these are your communities, again, when we talk about folks that are from the countries and communities they grew up in, that's where they're working. They have a deep, deep, deep investment in knowledge that goes much further than I would ever be able to replicate in these places. So this is who I believe is our future and our legacy and what we're end with. So I'll stop there, and I'd love to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. It's too bad you don't believe in your program.
Yeah, I know. It's a real lacking passion is something I'm just really trying to work on.
It's great. Brandon, you've got something you want to ask.
I do. I'm just curious, sort of for education in general, outside of a standardized test, how do you measure whether you're being successful?
Yeah, so a lot of different ways.
Right,
we measure through some basic kind of progression numbers. So what percentage of students are progressing on to the next grade, what percentage of students are staying in continued grades. And then to be honest, we rarely look at the government mandated standardized tests. And what we do are some literacy testing that international education uses. So we use a thing called the EGRA that was developed by USAID that looks at how students are reading, because we've found that, the data will tell you that once you learn to read, you can, read to learn. So that is the foundational skill that we're talking about. And then we also get a lot of qualitative data, something that I personally was a bit more hesitant about at the beginning of my tenure with the organization, because I think qualitative data can seem soft if it's not gathered appropriately and scientifically. So we have, data scientists that work on community level interviews and all that kind of stuff that help us track over time changes in perception. So, interviewing parents, like, what is their likelihood that they're going to continue to send their students and that sort of thing.
Tony. You're muted, Tony.
Thank you. Sorry, my apologies. Thanks very much for your presentation, Leslie. Very educational and informative for us. A couple of things. I was very struck by the fact that where you were saying we're not here to give, we're here to partner. And when you said the headquarters are located in these 3 countries, then you really are partnering. But can you give any kind of measure of that? Is it like a challenge grants, or what are your needs? I'm thinking about the finances now, the dollar side of this thing, and how you fund your portion of it, and how these countries are funding their portion. Yeah,
absolutely. So our annual operating budget right now is around $8 million a year. That the New York US office is largely responsible for raising revenue. So primarily there's a full fundraising team, and they're largely responsible for that. In my job and working with programmatic and operations folks is sort of determining where to spend those dollars. So working with the country leaders on their budgets, and those are set several years in advance. So each country has annual operating budgets that are under 2 million. The cost of living in each place is very different. So, taking that into account. And then the actual fundraising is really just supported by Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos. Most of the staff in those countries are programmatic staff, are frontline, like working in schools, working with governments, all that kind of stuff. So the funding on sort of the back end comes from high net worth individuals, corporations, some foundations. Used to come from special events when people got to go to special events, things like that, and then distributed throughout the course of the year to the countries.
Dave Malcolm.
Hello, I've got 2 questions. One, you've got your operations in different countries that are obviously different cultures. And so are there any things that are particular in this country that we don't do in others? Or, what's different because of the cultures? And the second question is, I suppose it's a little bit about the cultures, but what grades are your schools? Is it the equivalent of grade school, middle school, but we don't do high school because they don't do it in that country, or what?
Yeah, great questions. So Pencils of Promise operates in pre-primary and primary school. So like preschool and elementary school. There are middle school and high school equivalents in each of these countries, but our work is really targeted at the early years, kind of with the thought of early intervention is not what matters most, but early intervention is foundational, right? So that's where our work is targeted. And it might eventually in the next decade grow into the older grades, but that's where we're deeply focused. And then culturally, each country is incredibly different. So, you know, the sort of means and the mode of teaching and support looks very different from here, looks very, very different from one another, just kind of visually and what you're talking about. Like in Ghana, for example, I don't know that you could spend more than 30 minutes in a classroom without there being singing and dancing. Like it's just that a part of every single part of culture and community and gathering like that. It just looks and is that way. Where Laos, by contrast, every single teacher is going to be in a military uniform, which is going to look pretty different than that dancing Ghanaian teacher. So it's not, you know, some of the outcomes aren't all that disparate, but it does look really different. I find what I'm finding most interesting, probably just in my own life, is my daughter will go to New York City public schools next year. So I'm like really thinking about public school systems and what those look like. And so I'm thinking about like how different her experience will be here in some things that I think that she won't have that students in Ghana, Guatemala, and Laos do have. Like she probably won't get to sing and dance every 30 minutes in her classroom. So there's things like that will look different. Something that I've found to be incredibly interesting that the international education community is talking a lot about, which I touched on very briefly, is menstrual hygiene management and education for girls about their bodies. When we talk about doing that globally, it's just everyone that learns. You could literally walk up to a classroom and try to picture this in a US classroom, because I cannot. But you would walk up to a classroom in Ghana and boys and girls and teachers and parents, men and women, would be sewing and making reusable pads for the girls. In a million years, could I not see US education ever doing that, or that ever looking that way? But it is such a deep barrier. It's such a barrier. You have girls that are dropping out very quickly because of this. So the whole community knows we have to destigmatize this, or this will literally stop our girls from growing and elevating. So I think seeing those types of differences of what's changing is really fascinating. There's tons of them.
And that topic is the main article in the Rotarian magazine. That's the US national magazine that gets sent to all Rotarian members. And that's the front cover and the major article this month.
Really amazing. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. Okay. Shantu.
Leslie, good afternoon. Thank you for your nice painting behind you. The question
I know, it
I
matches
have,
my hair. It's not on purpose, but I
yeah,
kind of
that's,
like
I was
blend
going to
into
tell
it
that
sometimes.
compliment also, but I stopped that. That was my comparison. But the question I have, do you provide the meals to the students so that students come to the school that way?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Do you provide meals, the lunches?
Meals.
To the,
Meals.
to the students so that they come regularly to school?
Yeah, we partner with several school feeding programs because that's a huge barrier, making sure. So we explicitly don't do it, but so in, like, for example, in Guatemala, that's largely community led. So when we build a school, we build a kitchen. And that kitchen is a kitchen that's safe to cook in. So it's, you know, a bit more open air and like all those types of things. So it looks different. In Ghana, we help make sure that there's an area for like the community-led concession type thing to exist. So we very much take that into account because that is one of the very easy barriers. And one of the things that we saw very early on in Laos was that Lao in particular is a very familial culture. And so all students go home for lunch. Like the idea of not going home for lunch is just totally nuts. Like, why would you not eat lunch with your family? But we had to make it so we did not need to instill a feeding program. What we needed to do in that case was find an incentive for students to come back. Because after you go home for lunch, you know, and you're like, belly's nice and warm and full, and you're with your family, it's a little hard to get back out the door. So in each country, it looks a little different how we have to augment that, but we do take that into consideration.
Okay, two more questions. Ron?
There we go. The three countries that you're in are really extraordinarily different. And earlier you had kind of outlined some things that they needed to have for you to feel like you could work in there. So you must have had an initial connection of some sort, whether your founder had a personal connection there or somebody. So why is it those three particular countries? Because I assume, you know, if you were big enough, there were other countries that would meet your criteria.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So when and if we are not 8 million, but 80 million, that will scale much larger. Great question. So Laos is the first place that we operated, and that was based on individual personal connection with the founder and then CEO. He had traveled a bunch, spent a lot of time there, and then having spent time and had conversations there, that became ultimately the first place. And it was a really small scale effort. He was a 25-year-old kid who wanted to build one school in honor of his grandmother. And so that's what he did. And that was in Laos. And then that ultimately ended up growing. From there, and that's when I became a part of the organization. From there, the next step was strategically Central America, because we wanted to be operating somewhere. We wanted to kind of test our theories, right? Like, does this thing work outside of Laos? And we also wanted to be able to fundraise. And quite frankly, not everyone knows where Laos is or has heard of it or knows much about it or has much draw to it. So we wanted to be global. We wanted to make sure that we weren't in the funding scape, sort of pigeonholed into that Lao organization. So that really drove us towards Central America. And that's where we started looking at, you know, those criteria. And one of the main things that we've always looked for is a trusted partner organization to start with, so that we're not walking in the door just like me, literally like, hey, I want to start this thing. That we have someone that's deeply vetted, that we spend the first year or 2 years working alongside, learning about this. So that's one of the key things. And then from Guatemala, we did the same thing when we were looking to work in Africa. We also wanted to expand. We wanted to continue to test. We wanted to continue our funding capabilities. I mean, when you're looking at grant cycles, for example, there's lots of large scale funders that only fund certain regions. So by opening up to Central America, Asia, and Africa, you're able to kind of broaden that scope. And then when we were looking for Ghana, I got some of the best advice I've ever gotten from a then board member that said that we were talking about expansion, and she said, this is the moment that you want to really think about portfolio management. You want to operate somewhere where you can be successful. So that's really where we started thinking, you know, at that point in time, our founder, who, bless him, good friend of mine, but, you know, a founder, big thinker, he was like, it's South Sudan or bust. And we were like, let's take a beat and think here about probability of success. Like, not saying we don't want to, or not saying there's not a need, but that's when we were like, let's think about, where do we know we can have an impact? Because it's not like just your success, it's your impact. Where do we know our dollars will go very far? They will go deep, we can spread, we can grow. So that's what really happened when we went to Ghana. And then I think as we continue to grow as an organization, I don't foresee us entering a country really in the same way that we have historically. I think it'll be more through partnerships, we've done some kind of one-off projects. We ran sort of an advisory role to Liberia when they did a program. We've done the same thing in Uganda. So I think it'll be more kind of hybrid type work, but that's how we ended up where we are today.
Okay, thank you.
One last quick question, Amy.
Hi, thank you for all you do and your energy. I'm just finishing up Dance Lest We All Fall Down by Margaret Wilson and her adventures in Brazil doing something similar. And she speaks to the need to get the parents committed and perhaps even a stipend to the parents so that the children don't have to work there in that culture, either prostituting themselves or being a maid. Do you run into the same thing where you have to find a way to keep the families content with the children not being part of their income stream in that short term hopefully
That's such a
looking
great,
to the
that's
long.
such a great question. I'll have to check that out. I'm going to tell a quick other story before I answer your question. Something that you might be interested in after reading that, one of the most kind of deeply studied, or maybe you're aware of, deeply studied interventions in aid was a stipend for parents in Indonesia, where they gave, anytime you're going to send a kid to school, you get this money. And it had great results. It had, really, really strong results, because that works. It's a little bit less of a barrier where we're working for a few reasons. One, we're working in rural areas. So while there is still child labor concerns, it's largely different. It's a lot of kind of family farm and crops work that can happen a little differently. So for example, I've spent some time in Bangladesh, completely different issue. Where there, you're talking about kids are working in factories. You really can't stop it. Kids are in factories all day, every day. So we don't run into that problem as much. I think the problem we run into is a bit more cultural and a bit more kind of, like I was saying, and it's not, you can accidentally take this Western lens and think like, why do, so-and-so not want the best for their kids? They do, they want the best for their kids. And sometimes the best is to stay home with your family if your school isn't safe and if you're not learning anything and all that. So it's a little more cultural for us, and kind of the long game of trying to help people understand and see the benefits of education. But yeah, so that's a great question. Thanks for asking.
So Leslie, thank you. Wow, what a great program. And thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
And you're welcome to stay on with us for the rest of our program. And we'd love to have you stay. You may also have things you need to do. So we also
Yeah,
understand that
I do need to jump. My daughter is, I need to jump, or you will see a 3.5-year-old any second. So I heard her just walk in the door. So I'm going to run downstairs. But thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate the time.
Thank you. And Melissa, thank you for bringing her. Bye-bye.
Bye, Melissa. Bye, Luann.